And let me just start off by asking the President, asking the leader of the Republican Party, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Healthcare constitutes 1/6 of the American economy. It impacts every man, woman, and child in our nation. And yet we have 13 Republicans, all men, working behind closed doors to produce legislation which will be brought to the United States Senate at the last moment so the American people don't know the disaster that it is. You know, what politics is about, or should be about, is if you are proud of what you do, you tell the world about it. You explain to the American people, to your constituents, why this is what I am proposing, this is how I voted, and this is why it is good for the people in my state and in my country. But it should tell every American, whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, whether you're conservative or progressive, it should tell you something that major legislation is being written at this moment, and most Republicans don't have a clue as to what's in that legislation, let alone Americans, let alone Democrats, let alone the average American. So I say to the Republican leadership, what are you afraid of? Bring that bill out. I am a member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. The Health Committee. The Health Committee. It is supposed to be the committee in which we deal with health issues. I see Senator Murray here as the ranking member of that committee, and she will concur with me that that committee has held 0 hearings. It is the Health Committee. We have not had one hearing to ask members of the administration, people throughout this country, what the impact of this legislation will be on the children, on the elderly, on working families, on those who have chronic diseases, on ordinary Americans. What impact will this legislation have on the lives of 300+ million people? We have not had one hearing, not one open discussion. And I should think that every Republican should be embarrassed by this. And I know that many of them are embarrassed about it. So before there is any vote on any health care legislation, we need to have a series of hearings to discuss the implications of what that legislation is about. Mr. President, as I think you have heard, during the debate over the Affordable Care Act, and I am a member of that committee, we had 47 bipartisan hearings, not only in the Health, Education, and Labor Committee, but also in the Finance Committee, other committees. There were roundtables. There were walkthroughs of the Affordable Care Act. There was a consideration of more than 300 amendments. Some 150 amendments offered by Republicans were accepted. In 2009 and 2010, the Finance Committee held 53 hearings, meetings, negotiations, and walkthroughs on the Affordable Care Act. That committee marked up the Affordable Care Act for 8 days. A markup means you accept amendments, you have debates on amendments. That was the longest markup in 22 years, and adopted during that process over 10 Republican amendments. When the bill was considered on the Senate floor, the Senate spent 25 consecutive days in session on health reform, the second longest session in history. And oddly enough, and interestingly enough, many of my Republican colleagues during that process, after 25 consecutive days on the Senate floor, after numerous hearings in the Health Committee, in the Finance Committee, there were senators who said it wasn't enough time. They were saying this is such an important piece of legislation. It's going to impact so many people. We need even more time. Senator Enzi said, quote, cutting off Senate debate and deliberation with the budget reconciliation process would shortchange legislation with enormous impact, end quote. Senator Lamar Alexander said, and I quote, "I don't think people are going to feel as good about a bill that restructures 1/6 of our economy, that affects every single American's health, and the health care bill is being written behind closed doors in the Democratic leader's office." So in other words, you had Republican leaders thinking that the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of discussion and debate on the Affordable Care Act was not enough. And I find it amazing that those same Republicans seem to think it's okay for legislation to be written behind closed doors and not have one single committee hearing. Now, the truth is, Mr. President, I can understand why Republicans do not want open discussion and open debate on this issue. Because the bill that they are working on, which is based on the disastrous bill passed in the House last month, is a bill that would do incalculable harm to people all over our country and really should not be considered as a health care bill. How do you talk about a so-called health care bill when you're throwing 23 million people off of health insurance? When we talk about a health care bill, the assumption is we are improving health care in America, not doing what the Republican House bill did, was to throw 23 million Americans off of health insurance. Surely that is not improving health care for American people. Cutting Medicaid by over $800 billion. And God only knows what the implication of that will be for the children, for the elderly, for people who are in nursing homes. You're not improving health care when you defund Planned Parenthood. And after all the rhetoric here about choice, 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 we want the American people to be able to go to their provider of choice. Oh, 2.5 million women who today get their health care through Planned Parenthood, I guess their choice doesn't matter. And then we hear about the needs of working class people. We have a candidate, Donald Trump, who talked about the needs of working class people. The House Republican bill, and we think the Senate bill will be very close to it, substantially raised premiums for older workers. And that is why, among other groups opposing the House bill, the AARP made the point that this would be a disaster for older workers. The truth is, Mr. President, this is not a health care bill. This is a tax break for the rich and multinational corporations bill. This is a bill that would provide over $200 billion in tax breaks to the top 2%. This is a bill that would provide hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks for the drug companies and the insurance companies. Last information I received, pharmaceutical industry, the major 5 drug companies made over $50 billion in profit. But this legislation would throw Americans off of health insurance to give the drug companies even more profit. This legislation, the House bill, and I think similarly the bill being worked on behind closed doors, is not only opposed by the AARP, the largest senior group in America, it is opposed by the American Cancer Society, by the American Heart Association, by the American Lung Association, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, the March of Dimes, the National MS Society, the American Medical Association, because the doctors know what a disaster this will be for health care for millions of Americans, the American Nurses Association, and the American Hospital Association. So you got all of these groups who are the pillars of health care in America saying, no, no, this is a disastrous bill, and yet we have the Republican leadership and a dozen or so members working behind closed doors. Now, Mr. President, nobody here has suggested that the Affordable Care Act should not be improved. In my view, it should be improved. In my view, deductibles are too high. co-payments are too high, premiums are too high, and certainly the fact that we're paying twice as much as any other country for prescription drugs, that has got to be dealt with also. So the task right now among sensible people is to put on the table and to be honest about it. What are the problems of the Affordable Care Act? How do we lower deductibles? How do we lower co-payments? How do we control escalating costs of health care? Those are reasonable questions that honest people should debate. But the answer is not to throw 23 million Americans off of health insurance. That is not a solution to the problem. That is an insult to the American people. Let me just conclude by stating this. Our job right now is to make sure that this disastrous Republican proposal never sees the light of day. And I would urge my Democratic colleagues, on behalf of the American people, the vast majority of whom know how bad this legislation is, that we have got to stand up and fight in an unprecedented way to make sure that that legislation never sees the light of day. And after we win that struggle, I would hope that we would come forward as a nation and join every other major country on earth, whether it's Canada, and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border, whether it's the United Kingdom, France, Germany, that we would join every other major nation on earth and say that health care is a right of all people, not a privilege. If you are an American, you are entitled to health care. You should not be one of the 23 million people thrown off of health care, bringing the total of uninsured in America over 50 million people. That is outrageous. So, Mr. President, I think you're going to hear the American people stand up loudly and clearly, demand transparency, demand serious debate on an issue of this consequence, and I think at the end of the day, this legislation will be defeated. Thank you, and I would yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Senator Carper, it's interesting. You talked about Tanzania. It reminds me of a greeting that I've often heard from people who live in various African countries. You've probably heard it. But when you meet someone for the first time, instead of what we would normally say, pleased to meet you, the greeting back is, I see you. I see you. And I think that really is part of our concern here. Do we see the people who will be impacted in the way that they are actually living their lives? And do we understand, if we see them, that this bill will not be in their best interests? And right now, for example, we know 13 senators, all Republicans, are crafting a bill, and this bill would restructure our nation's entire healthcare system, which, when you add up what Americans can spend on hospitals, doctors, prescription drugs, and all the rest, we understand that it makes up 1/6 of our economy. It would affect the lives of everyone: our parents, grandparents, those who are in need of caregiving, our children struggling with asthma or opioid abuse, our spouses who may be battling cancer. And what is equally distressing is that this bill is being written in secret. The chairman of the Finance Committee says he has not seen the bill. The Secretary of Health and Human Services says he has not seen the bill. The American people, the people we all represent, have certainly not seen the bill. Well, I think the American people deserve better. This bill is being written entirely along partisan lines without any attempt to bring Democrats on board. And the American people deserve better. This bill is being written and rushed through the Senate with hardly any time to debate the cost or the details of this proposal. And the American people deserve better. Now, I remember when our colleagues across the aisle said the Affordable Care Act was being rammed down the American people's throats in the middle of the night. Well, the ACA went, in fact, through 106 public hearings. It incorporated more than 170 Republican amendments. The whole process took an entire year. But this health care plan involves no hearings, no bill text, and no transparency at all. As United States senators, we were